I hugged a murderer, a man who was supposed to guide me spiritually, who was supposed to protect and uplift me. He was my pastor, and for years, I trusted him with my soul. But hidden beneath his sermons, his prayers, and his smiles, he harbored secrets so dark they would forever change how I saw the world. Even now, when I think back to that moment, the memory of it makes my skin crawl, because I didn't just hug a murderer, I hugged someone who had killed 2 wives and nearly got away with both. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small Christian church. You know the type, close-knit, family-oriented, where everyone knows everyone. It was a comforting bubble, a safe place. Sunday mornings meant pancakes with the family, then church, where we kids would play while the adults gathered for service. Life was simple, and the church was my second home. But in 2008, when I was about 9, things started to unravel in ways that no one could have predicted. One day, the entire congregation was hit with a tragic piece of news: someone from our church had committed suicide. It was shocking, confusing even. For a while, the air in the church was thick with grief, and no one really knew why it had happened. As kids, we were shielded from most of the details, but there was an unspoken tension among the adults. It was a wound that would never quite heal. Then, only a few months later, our pastor's wife died. She was a kind woman, always so gentle and full of life. We were told she had been in a car accident, a tragedy that devastated the church even further. The pain was real, especially for our pastor. He stood in front of us, heartbroken, speaking about the love of his life, the woman he had lost too soon. We mourned with him. We prayed for him. I remember how my family and I stood in line at her memorial service, waiting our turn to offer our condolences. And when my turn came, I hugged him, told him I was sorry for his loss, never realizing that I was embracing the very man who had stolen her life. At that moment, I thought I was comforting a grieving husband. I had no idea I was standing face to face with a killer. For over a year, he continued to preach from the pulpit. We never suspected a thing. He carried himself like a man of God, like someone who was still hurting but had found solace in his faith. Every Sunday, he'd stand in front of us, delivering sermons, guiding us spiritually, while the truth lay buried beneath his righteous facade. Then, the whispers started. Quiet, subtle at first, but they grew louder over time. People began to question the circumstances of his wife's death. Something didn't add up. How could a simple car accident have caused such devastating injuries? And why did certain details feel off, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together? It wasn't long before an investigation was opened. And what they found shattered everything we thought we knew. The accident had been staged. In reality, he had beaten her to death. Our beloved pastor, the man we trusted, the man we prayed with, had murdered his own wife and tried to cover it up. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and we had all been fooled. But that wasn't the end of it. As more questions arose, people began looking into the death of his first wife, who had passed away in 1999 under similarly mysterious circumstances. Back then, it had been ruled an accident too. But now, with fresh eyes and the weight of new evidence, it became horrifyingly clear he had killed her too. This man had married 2 women, loved them, and then murdered them in cold blood. He'd gotten away with the first one for nearly a decade, and he almost escaped justice for the second. The realization was like a punch to the gut. And as if that wasn't enough, the truth behind the suicide that had shaken our church in 2008 also came to light. The man who had taken his own life had been driven to it by our pastor's affair with his wife. A married woman, part of our congregation. The layers of deception and betrayal felt endless, as if everything we'd ever believed had been turned upside down. I think what haunts me the most isn't just the fact that I was so close to him, that I had trusted him, stayed at his house during church retreats, or that he knew me and my family so well. It's the thought that so many lives were destroyed, so many hearts broken, and so many souls left shattered in the wake of his evil. He was a pastor, a man we looked to for guidance, for wisdom. And all along, he was hiding the truth of who he really was, a murderer who wore the mask of a saint. Years later, I still struggle to trust people. How could I not, after something like that? It's terrifying to think how easily someone can hide their true self, how darkness can live behind the warmest of smiles.